Let me tell you about being an interpreter, a professional interpreter. Here is the code of ethics that governs professional interpreters. Now, this don't matter if you're a school interpreter, a political interpreter, a medical interpreter, which is what I was, or a legal interpreter. It doesn't matter what category of interpreter you are. The code of ethics applies to all interpreters. The fundamental principle at the root of the code of ethics for professional interpreters is this. Imagine the bridge of the Enterprise on Star Trek, right? Captain Kirk, Spock, the Enterprise. Do you remember that when they would, the Klingons would be calling them? So they bring up the Klingons on the big screen. I don't remember what they called it. And I'm not a big Trekkie. I love the movies and I love the lore and everything, but I'm not a big nerd about it. But you remember the old show. So the screen would come on and there would be the Klingon. He'd start talking to Kirk. But was Kirk hearing? No, he wasn't hearing that. He was hearing perfectly understandable English coming out of the display, wasn't he? Well, the Klingons speak Klingon. So it's not that Kirk is a linguist. They had a computer on the bridge of the Enterprise. And that computer would take what the Klingons were saying and translate that or interpret that into perfect English so that Kirk and the other members on the bridge could understand what was being said. And when Kirk would talk back to the Klingons, his English would get interpreted perfectly into Klingon. So the same thing was happening on the other side. So the machine that is doing all this work, the computer that is doing all this work, let me ask you a question. Do you think if the Klingons say, for example, Kirk, you are a stupid, fat, ignorant man, and we're going to blow your ship up, does the machine, the computer, have the capacity to go, oof, those are fighting words. Well, I better not say that because I don't want to upset Kirk. So he says, the interpreter says, Kirk, the Klingons say that they're not very happy with you, and they're going to get violent if you don't cave to their commands. So then Kirk says, well, we'll see about that. And he says, I'll tell you what, Mr. Klingon, there's only one thing uglier in this universe than your mother, and it's your grandmother. And then the Klingon computer says, oof, those are fighting words. Boy, I can't say that. That'll get me into trouble. I better soften that a little bit. Mr. Klingon, Captain Kirk says that he met your mother once. She's a wonderful woman, but these sorts of threats will not stand. You see what I'm getting at? The computer is indifferent. It's completely indifferent. It doesn't care. It has no sense of whether what Kirk is saying is socially acceptable or not. And it has no care in the world about whether what the Klingons say are going to upset somebody or hurt feelings or anything like that. Its only function is to take what comes in and spit the exact equivalent out, right? That is the fundamental principle encompassing the code of ethics for interpreters. Now, how hard is that to do? How hard is that to do, you think? Well, I've told you the story before about being in a situation where the doctor told the patient, you've got something like 3 weeks to live. And the patient was distraught. What do I do? And the doctor turned around to him and said, hey, just coldly, completely coldly said, it is what it is. Just like it's not my problem. It just is what it is. Me imagining myself as the computer on the bridge of the Enterprise and knowing that that is the principle that I have to apply as an interpreter. Do you know what I said? I said, hey, it just is what it is. To the patient. Now, do you think I enjoyed that? No, I didn't. But I viewed myself exactly like that non-feeling computer that has no say in the thing. I'm not speaking for myself. I'm taking one person's message and I am presenting it faithfully. How many other interpreters do you think adhere to those code of ethics? I have worked shoulder to shoulder with the best interpreters. I've worked with hundreds of interpreters. I've seen them work. I've gone through courses with them. I've been their colleagues. And I will tell you this. I am the only person out of hundreds of interpreters that I have worked with that I know of who demonstrated a true interest in adhering to the code of ethics of professional interpreters. It's true. It's gotten me fired from jobs. There was one hospital in Philadelphia. I can't mention it because they'll sue me. They've threatened to in the past. They're right in Center City, Philadelphia. Great big teaching hospital. I was in there one day interpreting for a patient. There was an Indian resident doctor who was doing rounds that morning. Went in to speak to the patient. She's talking amongst her students, her other doctors, at the foot of the bed of this patient, and I'm interpreting every single thing, just like that machine on the bridge of the Enterprise would do, right? It wouldn't say, well, I better leave this out. Well, I better include this, better leave this out. Nope. If you're in that range, then everything gets interpreted. Every huh, every what, every everything. And that is how I worked. Do you think that my bosses appreciated that about me? No, they didn't. They did not appreciate that about me. Most of them. Most of them were looking for reasons to get rid of me because it was problematic. It was problematic that I held so fast to the code of ethics for professional interpreters. So in this situation that morning in this hospital in Center City, Philadelphia, that I'm not allowed to mention because they'll sue me, this doctor, she got upset with me, this Indian doctor. She says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Doctor, I'm the interpreter. My sole purpose for being here is to interpret everything that is said around this patient." "Well, I don't want you to do that." I said, "Then I'd recommend you go outside in the hallway to have this conversation." Well, she's too arrogant and proud to do that, so she's not going to do that. So she starts talking again, and I started interpreting again. And she got angry at me, and she started cursing at me and telling me what she thought of me. And I interpreted that for the patient too. Thing is, she's talking about the patient like the patient's not there. And my job as a professional interpreter is to put every patient, every every Spanish-speaking patient on the same ground as if you yourself were lying in that bed, could understand everything that was being said. Right? That is my job. That is the fundamental reason for my job existing. And so the doctor is standing there talking about the patient and doesn't want the patient to know what they're saying. Do you see why it's even unconscionable for me to stand there and not interpret? It's no small thing. I had to interpret what she was saying. And, she got upset about that. But I went down, I reported the situation in great detail, and they fired me. They fired me for doing my job. I have never, in my almost 20 years as a professional interpreter, seen anybody who adhered to the code of ethics, other interpreters who adhered to the code of ethics like I did and valued them like I did. Why? Why not? Was it because they weren't very smart? Was it because they weren't intelligent? Was it because they didn't understand the code of ethics? No, it was because when it come down to it, their feelings won. Their feelings won. They could not bear to just stand by and be an emotionally detached observer and a performer, or perform a emotionally detached function in the scheme of the situation. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. We're talking about hundreds of interpreters that I've worked with. I watched them left and right of me violate the fundamental code of ethics that is supposed to guide all interpreters for the most ridiculous things. For example, when you're an interpreter, you're supposed to create the conditions that your interpretation, your work as an interpreter, is so effective and so good that a person feels empowered to act on their own behalf, just like if you spoke English and you're in an English-speaking hospital, right? If I go into the hospital and I'm sitting there and I don't know how to fill out a form, for example, what would I do? If I'm sitting there, they have asked me to fill out this form, and I'm sitting there, I don't know what to put there. Is anybody going to swoop in for me, an English speaker, and go, hey, let me fill that document out for you, and then take that document and then start filling it out for me? Is anybody going to do that for me? No. But if you're a Spanish speaker and you have an interpreter assigned to you, do you know what the interpreter will almost all the time do? Unless you're me, I mean, I'm sure that there are other principled interpreters out there. But do you know what 99% of interpreters will do? They will take the clipboard from you. They'll start filling it out for you. Now, does that follow the code of ethics of interpretation? It absolutely does not. It absolutely does not. In fact, it shows a complete lack of skill. You don't have the skill as an interpreter to create the conditions simply from your interpreting to empower the patient to feel empowered to get up and go ask somebody a question. Hey, what do I put in here? One of the hospital staff I'm talking about. You don't have that skill, and you feel bad, right? You feel bad that they're stuck on a question. So you can't help yourself. All your intelligence and your reason goes right out the window. You can't stand to be uncomfortable in that situation. You're going to completely betray the code of ethics. Take the clipboard, start filling out the questionnaire for the patients. I watched this over and over again over 20 years. One of the last jobs I had as an interpreter before I started this work with the last symptom was with a school district in Columbus, Ohio. In Dublin, Ohio. And I was working for a kind of a ritzy school district up there. When they interviewed me for that job, that was back in 2015, they asked me, what are the code of ethics? And I'm sitting at the end of a table. There's all these people from the school district on this really long table. They're all watching me. They want me to talk in Spanish for a little bit, so I talk in Spanish for a little bit. They're all impressed with that. Then they asked me about the code of ethics. I start telling them about the code of ethics, about how my job is not to speak for anybody. I don't speak for anybody. What I do is I take what you say and I faithfully interpret it, meaning for meaning, into the target language. That's my only job. They asked me questions like, well, what would you do if somebody said, hey, can you fill this out for me? Or can you do this other thing for me? I'd say, well, I wouldn't do it because fundamentally it goes against my purpose for being there at all. My purpose is to give you the ability to communicate and to express yourself completely, faithfully, meaning for meaning, everything you've got to say. And that's it. Oh, they loved that. They loved that when I gave that answer. I thought they were going to stand up and applaud. Well, guess what? I got the job. You know what they wanted me to do 2 weeks later? They wanted me to teach the students algebra. No, they didn't want me to interpret for the teachers. The teachers teaching algebra. They wanted me to sit down and do the students' homework for them. To actually sit down and explain with my own words how to do algebra. Well, the joke's on them because I suck at math. But the principle of the thing is what I'm talking about here. The principle of the thing is that I'm not the teacher. I should not be acting in the role of a teacher. Why did they love it 1 second when I'm in the interview and I gave the correct answer? I'll tell you why they loved it. They loved it because they knew I got the idea of the thing, but they assumed that once I got the job, just like every single interpreter out there, and you folks who are interpreters, I hope I'm putting a heavy guilt trip on you, because you folks are pathetic. You folks who are acting as interpreters, Well, let's put it this way. You folks who are filling the role of interpreters, but acting like anything but interpreters, and crossing every code of ethic line, every ethical line that you can think of because you think nobody's watching and you think it don't matter, you're wrong. You're no better than these journalists, these fake journalists, who take on the role and title of journalist very proudly and then do anything but adhere to anything resembling journalistic principle. Why am I even talking about all this? I'm talking about all this to emphasize the fact that intelligence is so secondary to the world. It does not move the world. A person who's intellectually very brilliant, intellectually, they will very easily betray intellect. It don't matter how intelligent you are. It don't matter. The most brilliant intellectual in the world will twist evidence to support whatever his or her feelings want to believe. If you're emotionally unhealthy and you love the idea of alien life, for example, it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, and it doesn't matter how many diplomas you have up on your wall. You will twist any and all evidence to support the idea of aliens. Do you think it's different? We spoke about the Supreme Court justices. Think it's different for them? What about scientists who have told you how life began? You think it's different for them? How about all the people out there in the media? All those fake journalists and all those people on TV. You think that intelligence is guiding them as they instruct you on what you should believe? It is feelings. It determines everything. You do a scientific study, the results just are what they are, but a person has to interpret the results. A person has to look at the results and say, well, that's what this means. Do you understand that? And do you understand that scientists never 100% agree on what those results mean? But I will tell you this, that in any field, there is a similarity. Like whatever drew people to that field in the first place, there is a similarity in that. Whatever their preconceptions and their biases are, there is a heavy leaning in one direction or another. So you say to yourself, well, the scientific method prohibits people's feelings from having an influence in the interpretation of a thing. No, it don't. First of all, yes, if the scientific method were adhered to, but what have we just established? Nobody adheres to anything. Why? Because they're people and they cannot resist their feelings. Why? Because most of the world is unhealthy and insincere. So what are you going to be? What does this encourage you to do or not do?